Okay, good day everyone. So for today's discussion, we are going to focus on lesson 1, the 21st century assessment. So on this discussion, we are going to discuss or to tackle about the characteristic of the 21st century assessment. Paano ba natin ma-distinguish kung ang isang assessment ay akma sa ating mga estudyante, lalo higit ngayon ay tayo ay or ang ating maging mga estudyante ay lahat ay marurunong na sa technology kumbaga. So, paano natin ma-assess ang mga bata natin na nandudun yung authenticity o yung tamang pamamaraan kung paano natin sila i-assess. So, tingnan natin sa discussion na ito kung ano ba yung 21st century assessment. So, for the learning outcomes, at the end of the lesson, the students should be able to 1. Use appropriate assessment tools and techniques as applied in instructional decision. And relate learning outcomes and assessment. So yan po yung ating learning outcomes. So yung objective ng ating discussion ngayong araw nito. So let's have our introduction. In order to thrive in this constantly changing and extremely challenging period, the acquisition of 21st century skills is necessary. Mahalaga na alam natin yung tinatawag natin na 21st century skills, 21st century learners, 21st century teachers. Lahat yan magkakaugnay. Kasi nga, sabi nga natin, lahat nagbabago. May pagbabagong nagaganap on our usual thing. Hindi yung traditional noon na ginagawa natin ay ganun pa din hanggang sa kasalukuyan. Maaaring magkaroon tayo ng mga changes na pwedeng maging bahagi ng ating pagkatuto o pagkatuto ng ating mga mag-aaral. It is imperative that the educational system sees that these skills are developed and honed before the learners graduate. Bago pa sila magtapos sa school, dapat itong mga competencies na ito, itong mga skills na ito, is napag-aralan na nila, na-develop na para sa kanila. It should be integrated in the program of each discipline. More than just acquiring knowledge, its application is important. Hindi lang basta natin tinuturuan yung bata, kundi inia-apply din dapat nila. Mahalaga yung application, mahalaga yung kung paano nila inia-apply on their own knowledge, on their own experiences, kung ano po yung natutunan nila. To ensure that education has really done its role, ways to measure or to assess the learning process are necessary. Thus, the assessment processes and tools must be suited to the needs and requirements of the 21st century. So in this chapter, or in this lesson, for the characteristic of 21st century assessment, how it is used as one of the inputs in making instructional decision, and outcome-based assessment will be discussed. So yan po yung content ng ating magiging flow ng magiging discussion natin ngayon. Okay, let's proceed. Inevitably, the 21st century is here, demanding a lot of changes, development, and re-engineering of systems in different fields for this generation to thrive. Andiyan na siya eh. Nandun na tayo sa panahon na nandiyan na yung 21st century. Maraming changes. Yung nakasanayan natin, yung mga bagay na ginagawa natin noon na nung tayo ay elementary, high school, iba na sa magiging flow ng learning pagdating ng nasa field na kayo or nasa way of nagtuturo na kayo na kayo ay nasa teaching profession na. In the field of education, most of the changes focused on teaching and learning. Preparing and equipping the teachers to cater to the needs of the 21st century learners are part of the adjustment being done in the education system. Curricula are updated to address the needs of the community in relation to the demands of the 21st century. So yung ating present curriculum is binabago, nagkakaroon din ng changes. May mga napag-aralan tayo noon sa lumang competencies na wala na ngayon, hindi nakasali sa competency ngayon or na-improve na sa competency na ngayon. Mula dun sa tinatawag natin na naabutan ng iba sa inyo, yung basic education curriculum at na sinundan ng revised basic education curriculum hanggang sa kasalukuyan na we are looking on the K-12 curriculum. So nagkakaroon ng changes kasi iniaakman na nga, inilalagay na or iniaayon na doon sa pangangailangan ng mga learners. This aspect of teaching and learning has been given its share of focus. The various components, factors analyzed and updated to ensure that students' learning will be at par with the demands of the 21st century. Kasi yun yung goal. Yung goal natin is makapag-produce tayo ng mga graduates na competitive, na yung graduates na align dun sa 21st century skills na kailangan. Hindi na po pwede yung papasok, matutong magsulat, magbasa, hindi na lang ganon. Although nagdoon pa din yon, yung magtutong magsulat, magbasa, magkwenta ang bata, still, meron tayong mga iba pang parte na kailangang i-focus gaya nung kanilang kakayahan that align with the 21st century. So, although a lot of changes has been made on the different facets of education, there are some members of the educational community calling for corresponding development or change in educational assessment. So, viewing educational assessment as an agent of educational change is of great importance. Kasi, learners learn and we assess them. Napakahalaga kasi ng assessment. Paano kung yung assessment mo, yung pamamaraan ng assessment mo, hindi na akma dun sa pamamaraan ng estudyante natin. So, we need to cope with the changing form or world. This belief, coupled with the traditional focus on teaching and learning, will produce a strong and emerging imperative to alter our long-held using these three parts: teaching, learning, and assessment. Ganun naman talaga yung ating pinaghahandaan in every lesson, di ba? We are going to focus on how we teach, paano sila matuto, and how we are going to assess them. That is the main focus of assessment, specifically on the 21st century learners. Okay, 21st century skills must build on the core literacy and numeracy that all students must master. Students need to think critically and creatively, communicate and collaboratively effectively, and work globally to be productive, accountable citizens and leaders. Diyan po natin ipiniprepare yung mga learners natin. We are not just focusing on literacy and numeracy, although yan dapat yung una nilang mamamaster. Pero, dapat na mamaster din nila yung yung tinatawag nila na critical thinking. They should be creative. They can communicate effectively. Kasi, hindi natin masasabi kung ano yung future ng mga estudyante. Maaaring hindi naman sila dito makapagtrabaho. Maaaring makapunta sila sa ibang bansa. And then, they need to gain those skills to be competitive in the world of work. So these skills to be honed must be assessed, not just simply to get numerical result, but more so to take the result of assessment as guide to take further action. Gumagawa tayo ng assessment class kapag to make our decision firm. Hindi lang basta kumukuha tayo ng numerical result na kapag tapos ng exam, tapos ng assessment, O, ang grade ni bata ay 85, 90. Hindi lang ganon. Because those numbers matters on the action that we are going to use. The further action that we are going to do. Bakit? Kasi, pagbagsak sila, we need to take another action. We need to do some action. Like, we need to teach again. We need to take again the lesson para mas maunawaan nila. Ang isang teacher o ang isang educator should focus on 3. How to teach, paano ka magtuturo. What to teach, ano ang ituturo mo. How to teach, paano ka magtuturo. At how to assess, paano mo sila i-assess or paano mo makukuha yung necessary result ng kanilang learnings. So yan po dapat yung nakafocus. Although, there are some extra work burden ng teacher, hindi dapat mawawala yung tatlong focus na yan. Diyan po dapat naka-align yung mga estudyante natin o yung teacher dapat diyan lang po sila naka-align. Okay. Let's continue. The Assessment and Teaching of 21st Century Skills project has a core belief that alignment of goals with learners in assessment is essential to policy and practice. They emphasize the importance of balanced assessment systems that incorporate the 21st century goals. Yun po lagi, dapat siya ay mayroong focus doon sa 21st century skills. Lagi nating titingnan, ano ba yung kakayanan ng estudyante ko na align doon sa 21st century goals. And yun yung i-assess natin dapat. Okay. Dako tayo sa characteristic of the 21st century assessment. Paano ba natin masasabi na ang isang assessment ay o ang isang assessment ay based sa 21st century? Ano ba yung mga characteristic nila? So meron tayo, number 1 is responsive. Kailan ba nagiging responsive ang isang assessment? So visible performance-based work as a result of assessment generates data that inform curriculum and instruction. Teachers can adjust instruction. School leaders can consider additional educational opportunities for students, and policymakers can modify programs and resources to cater to the present needs of the school community. Processes for responding to assessment are thoughtfully developed, incorporating best practices and feedback in formative assessment. So dapat, para siyang parang kung ano yung pangangailangan ng field, ng educational field, is napoprovide. Yung mga teacher can adjust instruction, kung ano yung needs ng mga estudyante, dapat naka-align yung instruction na ginagawa ni teacher. Yung mga school leaders, yung mga principal, school head, dapat they have this considerable additional opportunities for students. So nagkakaroon ng changes. Responsive siya dapat. Ang assessment natin dapat responsive sa 21st century. Feedbacking is very important when it comes to 21st century assessment. Tandaan po natin na ang feedback lagi yung kasabay ng meron agad laging feedback. Kailan ba natin ginagawa ang feedback? Ito ba ay ginagawa natin before we had the discussion, the lesson? Ito ba ay ginagawa natin right after the lesson? Or ginagawa natin ito during the lesson? Ang feedback po is palaging on the spot. I mean, laging nandiyan agad. Hindi mo po pwedeng patagalin ang feedback. Kailangan laging, halimbawa, nagsagot yung bata, sumagot yung bata, yung estudyante, laging may feedback ka agad para malaman mo niya or malaman mo kung ano po yung mga dapat i-improve kung meron man. So, mahalaga na ang isang assessment ay responsive. Madaling nandiyan agad in just one click Parang gano'n na kung ano yung pangangailangan, nare-response agad. So, yan po yung responsive. Number 2 is flexible. Ang assessment, dapat siya ay flexible. So, alam naman na natin, alam na natin kung anong ibig sabihin ng flexible. Dapat it can fit to anyone, to everyone, to anything. So, dapat yung curriculum, yung lesson design natin, yung ating mga assessment, ay nai-adapt natin sa kung ano yung meron tayo sa mga estudyante natin, kung ano yung setting na meron yung estudyante natin. So, an assessment should be flexible. So, dapat, kung siya ay 21st century learners, dapat yung approach mo, yung iyong mga lesson, yung iyong mga paraan is dapat pang 21st century learners din. Dapat flexible ka. Pag biglang hindi naman natin masasabi na lahat ng mga estudyante natin ay matalino, maalam, di ba? So, dapat flexible ka din kasi meron tayong tinatawag na struggling learners na hindi mo po pwedeng gawin kung ano po yung ginagawa mo doon sa mga estudyante na medyo nakakaangat or na nabibigyan ng attention yung lesson. So, dapat flexible ka. Alam mo kung paano sila i-approach. So, assessment should be flexible. Ang assessment dapat para sa lahat, pwede sa lahat. Kayang i-adjust para sa lahat. Number 3 is integrated. So, ang assessment laging nandiyan dyan, day to day. Hindi po pwedeng walang assessment. You are not going to teach without assessment. Laging merong assessment. Kasi yung assessment, parte yan nung pagkatuto. Diyan mo malalaman kung kailangan mong kailangan mong, ano yung mga action na gagawin mo pagkatapos. Halimbawa, bagsak yung mga estudyante, mababa ang score ng mga estudyante. So, anong gagawin mong kasunod? You need to reteach, you need to focus on the other way, strategies, ganun po ang gagawin. Yan, ganun po kahalaga. Kaya po, integrated siya, hindi po pwedeng mawala. Laging nandiyan yung assessment. So, assessment, it can enrich metacognition. So, sabi nga, assessment is about stimulating thinking, building on prior knowledge or learning, constructing meaning, and thinking about one's thinking. So, dapat, depende dun sa sa pamamaraan. It should be integrated all the time. So hindi po pwedeng matapos ang araw na wala kang assessment na nagagawa para sa kanila. It should be integrated all the time. Yun po yung one characteristic ng assessment. Okay, next, informative. Paano naman nagiging informative ang isang object o ang isang assessment? So, dapat clear siya. Dapat mula dun sa learning objective mo hanggang sa assessment mo, clearly align. Kung ano yung objective mo, yun ang nasa instructional strategies mo, yun ang nasa assessment methods mo, at saka yun ang reporting mo. Naka-align lahat kung anong objective mo. Kung natatandaan ninyo during your Technology for the Teaching and Learning 2, ay sinabi ko sa inyo na kapag gagawa tayo ng assessment, dapat ay align doon sa inyong objective. Hindi po pwedeng gumawa ka ng isang assessment na taliwas doon sa objective mo. Kaya di ba nagkakaroon tayo ng mga changes lagi. Halimbawa, ang objective mo ay you are teaching since you are kahit kay TLE ba makapagturo din kayo ng ibang subject. For example, the subject is Filipino. Ang objective or ang layunin ay ganito. Natutukoy ang pangalan kung siya ay pantangi o pambalana. Yun yung objective natin. Natutukoy kung ang pangalan ay pantangi at pambalana. Yan yung objective. So, tinuro mo ano yung pantangi, ano yung pambalana, yun yung learning strategies mo. Pero pagdating dun sa last part, sa assessment, naging ganito yung iyong assessment. Nakalagay ay tukuyin ang pangalan sa pangungusap at sabihin kung siya ay pantangi o pambalana. Yan yung instruction mo dun sa assessment mo. Tukuyin ang pangalan sa pangungusap at sabihin kung siya ay pantangi o pambalana. Kitang-kita mo na agad kung ano po ang mali doon. Ang nasa objective mo is tukuyin lang kung ano ang pantangi at pambalana. Bakit ka maglalagay sa iyong assessment ng tukuyin ang pangalan? Although parte 'yon ng pantangi at pambalana, pero wala 'yun sa objective mo. Sana nasa objective mo na kapag tatapos ng aralin, inaasahan na mga mag-aaral ay natukoy ang pangalan sa pangungusap. Natukoy kung ang pangalan ay pantangi at pambalana. Kung gano'n yung objective mo. Pero pagdating sa assessment, dapat kung ano yung last objective mo lang, yun lang ilalagay mo. So, dapat ang magiging assessment mo is tukuyin kung ang mga salitang may salungguhit ay pantangi o pambalana. So, informative. Ang assessment mo dapat informative, hindi dapat nalilito ang estudyante mo kung ano po yung kung yung assessment mo ay parte pa rin ng lesson mo. Minsan kasi ganun eh. Sabi ko, ba't kaya ito ay iba na ang tinutukoy sa assessment kaysa dun sa itinuro ni teacher. So, ganun po yung assessment. Dapat informative. Dapat mula umpisa hanggang learning objective mo, hanggang sa iyong assessment, lahat yun ay magkakaulam. Okay, next, multiple methods. So, ang assessment, hindi lang nakabase yan sa kung ano yung, hindi lang nakabase sa isang pamamaraan. Marami tayong pamamaraan ng assessment. Pwede tayong gumawa ng iba't ibang uri ng assessment na magkikater dun sa skills ng bata. Halimbawa, pag nagpa-project ka or nagpagawa ka ng isang experiment, for example, sa science, di ba iba naman yung rubrics na gagamitin mo doon kaysa doon sa paper and pencil test, di ba? So, ibig sabihin, hindi po pwedeng isang uri lang ng assessment ang gagamitin mo sa sa mga estudyante mo. It has a multiple methods. Maraming pamamaraang pwedeng gawin. So, one of the characteristic of the 21st century, it has a multiple methods. Pwede kang bigay ng mga performance tasks, projects, at iba pang mga relevant tasks. Okay. Assessment should be also communicated. Communication of assessment data should be clear and transparent to all stakeholders. Mahalaga na yung napaka-importante na yung pamamaraan, yung naging resulta ng mga assessment natin should be properly communicated specifically or especially to the parents of your learners. Yung result nila, kung bakit yun naging ganon, and then ano yung progress na pwede nilang magawa. Mahalaga kasi yon. Halimbawa, naisabi mo, na-report mo na, naibigay mo na sa mga parents mo kung ano yung doon sa mga parents ng estudyante mo, na ipaliwanag mo na, doon kayo magka-come up kung ano pong uri ng assessment yung gagawin ninyo on the future. Halimbawa, ano yung pwede nyong mapagkasunduan na tawag dito na pwede nyong gawin habang para ma-identify po kung ano po yung naging problema. Parang i-resolve nyo yung naging problema sa batay doon sa napagkasunduan ninyo. Should be communicated. Properly communicated. Yan po yung isa sa characteristic ng assessment. 21st century assessment. Okay. Next, technically sound. So, medyo siya di ba? Medyo siya confusing. How can an assessment be technically sound? It should simple lang yung salitang tatandaan niyo dyan. It should be fair. There should be there should be authenticity. There should be fairness. Kung ano yung na ipakitang skills ng bata, yun dapat yung mag-a-appear sa kanyang result ng assessment. Kasi kaya nga tayo pinagpe-prepare lagi ng mga portfolio para makita ito pala yung performance ng estudyante ko, ito pala yung performance ko nung ako ay dito ko pala makikita kung ito ba ay bumagsak ba ako, ano ba yung mga mali kong nagawa dito sa aking mga result. So, to be valid, dapat siya ay ang mineasure mo as a teacher is based on the objective. Yun lang po yan. Dapat siya ay with legitimacy and integrity. Hindi ka nadaan sa kung ano-ano lang. Dapat authentic, dapat yun talaga yung pinagbasehan mo. That is technically sound. And number 8 is systemic. It follows system. So 21st century assessment is part of comprehensive and well-aligned assessment system that is balanced and inclusive of all students, constituents, and stakeholders and designed to support and improve at all levels. So this should be systemic. Kaya nga meron tayo, di ba, may mga grading system tayo. Meron tayong pina-follow na mga grading system. Meron tayong mga grade level. Kung ano yung level ng estudyante mo, yun lang dapat yung level ng assessment niya. It should be in a system. So yan po yung mga characteristic ng 21st century assessment. So kapag nasa field of education ka na, nagtuturo ka na, dapat alam mo kung ang ginagawa mong assessment is aligned with this characteristic. So dapat ganun yung takbuhin ng iyong assessment pagdating sa 21st century. And that is 21st century assessment. Okay. These 8 characteristics of 21st century assessment are essential guide for the preparation of assessment activities by educators. Ito yung magiging guide mo on making your assessment. It is necessary to refer to this characteristic to ensure that the learners are being assessed towards the skills in demand of the 21st century. Yan po dapat yung magiging laman nung iyong 21st century assessment. Diyan ka lang po maglaline. Pag nakasunod mo po yung 8 characteristic na yan, then you have done good assessment aligned with the 21st century. Okay, let's now have instructional decision and assessment. So sa pagkatuto ng ating mga estudyante, dapat alam natin what decision we are going to use in terms of assessment. The major objective of educational assessment is to have a holistic appraisal of a learner, his or her environment and accomplishment. The educational assessment process starts in analyzing the criterion together with the teaching learning environment. Una mong gagawin yon, you need to identify first your learners. You need to identify first what kind of teaching and learning environment you have. It is done to determine the effect of the environment to the teaching learning situation, after which the kind of evidence that are appropriate to use for assessment of the individuals are set. This helps to determine the strength, weaknesses, needs, and personality, characteristics, skills, and abilities of our learners. So mahalaga po ang assessment because it will help you in different instructional decision, yung paraan ng iyong pagtuturo. It is clear that educational assessment encompasses the total educational setting and not limited to the teacher-student engagement. It is not only focused on the teacher and the student inside the classroom, but on the whole educational setting. It is not merely based on a single aspect such as taking a test and checking it. Hindi doon natatapos na nagbigay ka ng test, chinekan mo, tapos na. So, dapat meron ka pang instructional decision or magiging basis mo pa siya for instructional decision. In totality, the process of measurement and evaluation are subsum in the educational assessment process. Okay. Decision making at different phases of teaching learning process. Assessment is constantly taking place in educational setting. Andiyan na po yun. Parte na po yan ng educational setting yung assessment. So, decisions are made about content, subject matter, and specific targets. Siyempre, sa umpisa, aalamin mo, ano ba yung subject ko? Ano ba yung lesson ko? Ano ba yung target ko para sa araw na ito? Then, kasunod mo nun, nature of students and faculty. Aalamin mo, sino ba mga estudyante ko, sino ba yung mga magiging estudyante ko, anong nature meron sila. Moral and satisfaction of both the teacher and the students, it is a collaboration, as well as the extent of which students' performance meet the standard and or deliver the outcome expected from them by the teacher. So, lahat yun nasa proseso, magiging parte ng proseso. Assessment can be used as basis for decision-making at different phases of the teaching-learning process. Okay, let's have this table below depicts the different phases of the teaching and learning process, how and what decisions are made by the teacher. So, yung next table po na makikita ninyo, explain po natin kung paano po kayo magde-decide, ano yung mga decision na gagawin ninyo dun sa different phases. Yung phases lang naman na pinag-usapan natin dito is yung before teaching, during teaching, and after teaching. So, isa-isahin po natin yon. Ano po ba yung mga decision making at ano yung mga sources na pwede nating pagkunan. Okay. So, let's start with before the start of teaching. So, ano po yung mga decision to be made, yung mga pwede nating gawin at before we start the teaching? Number one, or the first one is, content to cover during following day, week, month, grading period, and so on. Siyempre, alamin mo yan. Ano yung mga lesson mo sa araw na ito, sa linggong ito, sa buong buwan, sa grading period, and so on. Yun po yung una mong gagawin. Ikalwa, abilities of students considering the cultural background, interests, and skills of students in planning the teaching activities. So, aalamin mo yung mga, ano bang abilities meron yung mga estudyante mo. I-consider mo syempre yung kanilang cultural background, yung interest nila, yung skills na meron sila. So, you're going to plan that. So, dapat doon naka-align yung iyong lesson or yung iyong assessment. Next, materials appropriate to use with the students. Syempre, bago ka mag-start, isipin mo anong klaseng materials yung gagamitin mo with your students. Next is learning activities that will engage both the teacher and students as the lesson being taught. So, dapat ay magmamatter yung lesson activities na nakapaloob dun sa iyong plan, na kung saan ay dapat may enjoy ng estudyante at may enjoy din as well ng teacher. So, learning targets that the teacher wants to achieve as a result of teaching. Sa umpisa, dapat nakaset na yung learning targets mo, yung mga objectives mo, ano yung mga lesson target mo na dapat ma-achieve within the day, within the week, within the month, or within the quarter. Then, organization and arrangement of students in class in consideration of the lesson and activities. So, minsan, ginagawa na natin at the beginning, parang ginugroup na natin sila, yung magkakasama yung magkakapareho ng mga hilig, magkakapareho ng mga so ma-identify mo naman yan agad sa umpisa. So, ano po yung mga sources of information na pwedeng maging basihan o magiging decision mo at the beginning? So, pwedeng you need to have informal observation, matsyag-matsyag ka sa mga estudyante mo during class, tignan mo ano ba yung mga skills na meron itong mga estudyante ko. That is informal observation. Pwede rin conversation with students' previous teacher. Kausapin mo yung dating teacher nung estudyante. Tanong mo kung ano yung kanilang mga observation dun sa sa estudyante mo na hawak ngayon. Pwede ring scholastic aptitude test result. Conduct ang school ng aptitude test, and then magpagbabasehan mo yung result para makakame up ka ng decision. Then students past grades, pwede rin yung maging sources of information natin. Pagbabasehan mo kung ano yung grades or yung test result nung bata nung previous year niya. Yan, pwede po iyon na maging sources of information. Then knowledge of students' personal family circumstances, kasi medyo kasi kailangan mong alamin kung ano yung personal family circumstances nila. So yung mga sources of information na yun yung pwede mong magamit to come up with the decision we had on the second column. Ito mga decision to be made. So those are to be done before the start of the teaching process. Okay, ano naman yung mga decision na pwede natin gawin during teaching or habang tayo ay nagtuturo na? So first, students learning on what and how the lesson is presented. So nagtuturo ka na, pwede ka makapag-decide paano mo maituturo o maipresent ng maayos sa madaling paraan na matututo yung mga estudyante mo. Improvement needed to make the lesson work better. What feedback to give each student about how well student is learning? Ano yung mga kailangan mong ibigay na feedback? Readiness of the students to move to the next activity as planned in the learning sequence. So paano yung tinatawag natin na transition mula sa first activity mo papunta sa kasunod na activity. So ano naman yung mga sources of information na pwede mong pagbasehan ng mga decision mo na ito? First, observation of students during learning activities. Pagmasdan mo muna yung mga estudyante mo habang naggagawa ng mga activities nila. Student response to questions. Di ba, nagkakaroon kayo ng mga tanungan sa discussion. So, pagbasihan mo kung ano yung mga sagot ng mga estudyante mo. Observation ng student interaction. Paano sila makipag-interact dun sa lesson proper. Diagnosis of the types of errors the students made or erroneous thinking the students are using. Halimbawa, nagtanong ka, so ano yung mga errors na nakomit ng bata pagdating doon sa mga sagot? Pwede mong maging basehan yon. Look for alternative ways to teach the materials. Mga iba pang pamamaraan. So, yung mga sources of information na yan, kapag sinunod mo yan, pwede ka mag-come up to with the decision during the teaching process. Okay, ano naman yung mga decision to be made after a teaching segment? Tapos ka na magturo, after ka na ng teaching segments or after na magturo ka. Ano yung mga decision mo na pwedeng gawin? First, how will student achieve the short and long-term instructional targets? Paano mo mas mapapalawak pa yung learning targets na meron sila o natutunan nila? Strengths and weaknesses to be given as feedback to parents or guardians of students. Ano yung mga ililista mo, syempre yung mga strengths and weaknesses na pwede mong ibigay o ilahad dun sa parents ng bata sa pagkakaroon nyo o pag-meet nyo ng parents. Then, grade to be given to the students for the lesson or unit. Ano yung grades na ibibigay mo? Yan, decision din po yan after teaching. Effectiveness of teaching the lesson to the student. So, based dun sa naging assessment, naging overall performance ng bata, ano yung conclusion mo on the effectiveness of the teaching and learning process, as well as the curriculum and the materials you have made. Ano naman yung sources nun? Paano ka magka-come up dun sa decision na yon? Una, syempre, yung classroom test projects and observation. Yung mga result ng kanilang mga test, pwede yung pagbasehan. Interview with the students. Mga standardized test result, yung mga test result nila. Observation of each student classroom participation. So, review each student's homework results. So, lahat po yan, yung mga results nila, mga tests, pwede mo maging basihan nung decision na gagawin mo after you had a teaching process. So, ito pong tatlong phases na ito ay pinagdadaanan ng isang teacher na nagka-come up sa isang decision on how to that benefits the student. So, meron tayo mga suggested information na pwede nilang pagbasehan kung paano sila magka-come up with this decision. So, yan po yung decision on the different phases with regards to assessment. Okay? So, the list of decision and possible sources of information that could be used as input in decision-making process is not exhaustive. More can be included based on teaching, learning, observation, and experience during field study and observation courses. Hindi naman lahat ng suggested decision na yon ay gagawin natin. Depende pa rin po yun dun sa kung ano yung magka-come up dun sa magiging or dun sa proseso ng pagkatuto ng bata. Nasa sa teacher pa din naman po yun. Basta, magiging magiging fair lang tayo dun sa ating mga estudyante. Kasi yun ang mahalaga po is authenticity of the assessment we had. And that decision will be part of the assessment process. Okay, let us now proceed with assessment in classroom instruction. Lin and Grandland 2000 described the relevance of assessment in instructional decision by classifying the varied assessment procedure according to use in classroom instruction. So these are the following categories and purposes of each category. So meron tayong different assessment category, gaya ng placement assessment. Kailan ba natin ginagawa ang placement assessment? So, ang purpose ng placement assessment is to measure the entry behavior para makita natin sino yung mga tawag dito, yung mga struggling readers, struggling numerates, or mga non-numerates, hindi masyadong makapagkwenta, makapagbasa. So, ma-placement agad po natin. Kaya kasi tinawag na placement assessment. Halimbawa, nagbigay ka ng mga assessment, itong batang ito medyo mabagal pang bumasa, gugrupo mo sila, sasama-samahin mo sila para mas madali mong maturuan. Yung formative assessment naman, alam na natin yan na pag sinabi natin formative, ginagawa natin siya during discussion. So, alam natin that when it said formative, it is recorded but not part, or it is recorded but not part of the grading. So, ano po ang purpose ng formative assessment? The purpose of the formative assessment is to monitor learning progress. So, ginagawa natin yan during the lesson, di ba? Nagtatanong tayo, sumasagot ang estudyante. That is formative assessment. Next is diagnostic assessment. Just like a doctor, di ba? Bakit ba tayo nagkakandak ng mga diagnostic tests? Para malaman natin kung ano yung mga causes ng mga problema. Ganon din po sa assessment. Kaya tayo nagkakandak ng diagnostic assessment para makita natin ano ba yung problem na nagkukos dun sa ano yung causes ng mga learning problems na na-encounter natin. So that's why we are doing diagnostic assessment. And last is summative assessment. So the purpose of the summative assessment is to measure end of course achievement. Nakapag-discuss ka na, lahad mo na yung mga lesson mo, yung lesson objectives mo, so you are giving a summative assessment. It is the end of course achievement. Ano yung magiging resulta? So, Lin 1999 said that informed decision-making in education is very important because of the benefits it can bring about. Topmost of this benefit is the enhancement of student learning and development. Bakit ba tayo nagka-come up into a decision? So, mahalaga po na yung assessment is na nagmamatter, or yung assessment is nagmamatter because it is part of the decision-making. Kapag tayo ay nag-conduct ng assessment, mamomonitor natin ano ba yung progress na meron yung mga estudyante natin. In addition, there is the boost on morale and feeling of greatness in knowing one's competence in the area of academic skill and self-worth in knowing one's capability to function effectively in society. Lastly, the effective side of development is equally important, such as personal dimension, including being able to adjust to people in coping with various situations that will enhance better life adjustment. So, magiging parte kasi siya nung decision natin. Halimbawa, nagbigay ka ng assessment, nakita mo na medyo mababa ang scores ng mga estudyante mo, ano gagawin mo kasunod? Are you going to proceed to our next lesson, to the next lesson? No, you are going to think another strategies for them to learn. Baka hindi effective yung strategies na ginawa natin. Okay, there are types of educational decision. On a greater scale, the use of assessment in decision-making is not just within the bounds of the classroom. It extends to the whole education community. Hindi lang po siya naka-base doon. Yung decision natin is not just only based within the four corners of the classroom. It extends outside. Kaya nga meron tayong mga performance tasks na hindi naman po lang ginagawa sa school. Results of assessment may trigger updates in the existing curriculum and other policies governing the school system. Or it may be the other way around. So as to plan for changes or development in schools assessment and in what particular method of the school system these changes are necessary. So ano po yung mga type of educational decision na iyon? So these are the types of educational decision. Meron tayong tinatawag na instructional. Kailan po nagiging, ano po yung tinatawag natin na instructional decision? So normally, ito ay ginagawa ng teacher. So depende na po kung ano po yung pamamaraan niya. Siyempre, titingnan niya ano yung instructional decision na gagawin niya, anong klaseng anong klaseng strategies yung gagawin niya in order to learn the student. Ano yung mga example nito? Meron ditong example. So after a test was given by the teacher, the result is not so satisfactory. Thus, the teacher may decide to reteach the lesson using a different strategy. So sa instructional decision, halimbawa, nagpa-exam ka, nakita mo mababa yung score ng mga bata, doon yung pagbabasehan mo kung anong klaseng, anong strategy yung gagawin mo sa susunod. Halimbawa, mababa yung nila. So, you are not going to proceed to the next lesson, but rather, you are going to make another strategy that will help the learners to enhance their learnings. So, sa grading naman, decision ng grading naman, so it is usually based on teacher-made tests. Kung ano yung mga ginawa niyang test, kung ano yung score nila, yun, i-record nung teacher. So, meron tayong mga grades na inia-assign sa student based dun sa performance nila. Quarterly grade, based dun sa mga result, based dun sa mga sumusunod, like result of the teacher-made test, class participation, projects, and attendance. Di ba yan ay dinidiscuss natin at the beginning sa mga magulang? Ito po yung pinagbasehan ko ng grades ng inyong mga anak. Ito po ay kukunin ko po ang grades base doon sa result ng kanilang test, sa mga projects na sinabit nila, sa mga activities, performance na ginawa nila. Another is diagnostic. So ginagawa natin to know the strengths and weaknesses and the reason or reasons of the problem. Kaya gumagawa tayo ng diagnostic test. Halimbawa, a teacher gave an essay. The teacher noticed that the students were able to write. Yung estudyante daw ay nakakagawa ng sentences, grammatically correct sentences. Ang problema is hindi yung coherence, yung pagkakasunod-sunod ng mga sentences niya ay hindi maganda. So, hindi problema yung grammar ng bata. Ang problema is yung coherence ng kanyang pagkakasulat. hindi sunod-sunod or hindi arrange na maayos. So yun po yung sa diagnostic. Pinag-aaralan natin kung ano po yung strength and weaknesses. Strength niya ng bata is yung paggawa niya ng na walang grammatical error, pero yung weaknesses niya yung coherence of the sentence. So yun po yung problem, yung reason. Alamin natin ano yung reason. Next is selection. Isa pa sa decision na pwede nating gawin is yung selection. Mostly naman ito ay ginagawa sa mga college, university, mga entrance examination, mga quiz bee. So para pag hindi ka pag hindi mataas yung score mo, hindi ka nakapasa, hindi ka makakapasok doon sa school. Ganun lang po yung pagdating doon sa selection. Doon naman sa placement, ginagawa natin yan doon sa diagnostic, di ba? Nagbibigay din tayo ng diagnostic para makita natin sino yung mga, halimbawa, nagpabasa ka, o sino yung mga slow reader, sino yung mga batang mabibilis na magbasa. So, ihiwa-hiwalay mo po yun. Sa math, ganun din. Sino yung magaling na sa magbilang, magaling di pa masyadong maalam magkwenta, ma-identify mo yun. That is placement. Next is sa guidance and counseling. Ito naman ay ginagawa po ng mga guidance counselor. For sure, naranasan nyo yung tinatawag na NCAE. Yung NCAE, part yun ng guidance and counseling na kung saan ay tinitingnan yung career path na pwede sa estudyante based doon sa skills na meron siya o naipasa niya. Yun po yung sa guidance and counseling. Yun yung example. Sa program or curriculum naman, ay di ito na may in general. Halimbawa ay yung K-12 curriculum, i-assess kung ito ba effective o hindi. So magkakaroon na magpapalabas sila ng mga tests na mag-determine kung yung curriculum ay effective o hindi. That is in general na po 'yon, hindi na lang siya sa school, in buong department na po 'yon. So sa administrative policy naman ay ito naman hindi na sa teacher. Ito yung halimbawa yung mga school head, principal na dinidetermine ano po yung mga pangangailangan ng school at malagyan ng budget kung ano po yung mga pangangailangan doon. So the aforementioned educational decision are the primary reason why assessment in the educational setting is implementing continuously. Lahat ng nabanggit natin ng mga educational decision, nangyayari yan sa school system. Pero hindi naman lahat. Nangyayari sa school system, magiging part siya ng educational system at siya yung nag-determine kung siya po ay kung yung ating assessment na ginawa ay accurate o hindi. So, mahalaga yung decision pagdating sa assessment because assessment is part of the decision. Our assessment is part of what you are going to decide or part of your decision. Okay, let's now have or proceed the outcome-based assessment. So, papahapyawan na lang po natin ito kasi we have a different topic about outcome-based assessment. So, yung outcome-based from the word itself ay based dun sa outcome, dun sa learning outcome. Kung ano yung nasa learning outcome mo, yun dapat yung nasa assessment mo. Nabanggit ko na rin po yung kanina. Kung ano yung nasa assessment mo, nasa lesson objective mo, yun yung nasa assessment ko. Kaya mahalaga po ang tinatawag natin na student learning outcome. Paano ba tayo gumagawa dapat ng learning outcome? Di ba sa lesson planning, kayo na may nakapagsulat na rin ng lesson plan, ang isa sa pinakamahalagang parte nga po nito ay yung learning objective. So dapat, doon pa lang sa learning objective natin, specific na tayo. You are familiar with SMART, di ba? Kung narinig nyo na yung tinatawag na SMART, yung specific, measurable, attainable, resource-oriented, and time-bounded. So, specific, dapat hindi masyadong malawak. Like, for example, hindi dapat na ang objective mo ay ganito. Identify the different parts of speech. So, masyadong malawak yun kasi we have 8 parts of speech, di ba? So, dapat maging specific ka. Identify nouns. So, yan po lang, paisa-isa lang. Wag masyadong madami. Kasi, sabi nga dun sa term ng mga experienced teacher, mamumual ang bata pagka gayon. So, students should rely on the learning outcomes. What you have on the learning strategy should be aligned on the learning outcomes. So there are several factors that we need to understand or to be considered in making the learning outcomes. Okay. So these are the factors that need to be considered in crafting the student's expected learning outcomes. First, the mission statement of the school. Lagi dapat naka-align siya sa DepEd mission and vision kung siya ay sa DepEd or sa school. Mayroong sariling statement ng school or mission statement ng school, dapat naka-align siya. There should be aligned also, the learning outcome should be aligned on the mandated policies or on competencies and standards issued by government education agency. Yung mga policies and pagdating sa competencies, dapat siya ay aligned din doon. Number 3, competencies expected by different profession, business, and industry. Dapat siya ay hindi lang nagmamatter dun sa loob ng classroom. Yung objectives or learning outcome ay nakarely din dun sa different profession, business, and industry. So, and number 4, development plan and goals as well as the current trust of both the national and local governments. So, yan po yung mga dapat nating i-consider when making the learning outcomes. Okay. So, number 5, current global trends. Dapat align din po sa current global trends natin. And number 6 is 21st century skills lagi. Laging kasama yung 21st century skills kapag gagawa tayo ng learning outcomes. Okay, ano po ba yung characteristic ng isang magandang or good learning outcome? So, simple lang naman po yon. A good learning outcome should be, yung sabi ko nga, specific, measurable, attainable, resource-oriented, and time-bounded. Yun lang po ang inyong iisipin. So, dito sa mga sample na ito, characteristic of good learning outcomes, very specific, focus on the learner, realistic. Focus on the application and integration, good learning outcomes, offer a timeline. Yun din po yun, yung SMART din po yun. Specific, measurable, attainable, resource-oriented, and time-bounded. Yun lang po yung iisipin natin when it comes to making learning outcomes. Bakit po kailangan pa ng learning outcomes? Because to have a 21st century assessment, dapat nag-uumpisa ka with the learning outcomes. Yun lagi yung inuuna natin. Kasi doon magmamatter yung iyong learning strategies, doon magmamatter yung iyong yung activities mo, doon magmamatter yung assessment mo. Napakahalaga ng learning outcomes. So, to sum up this, 21st century assessment is part of the change. And sabi nga natin, if there is a change, we need to cope with these changes. As a future educator, the question is, how will I assess my learners? And that is very easy. I should assess my learners based on the 21st century skills. Our learners are technologically based learners. They are fond of computers, internet. They are equipped with different learning strategies. Mahalaga ang assessment pagdating sa mahalaga ang na malaman natin kung anong uri ng assessment ang gagamitin natin. And that assessment should be in the 21st century assessment. Okay? So, I think that's the end of our discussion. So, make sure to answer your activities stipulated on your self-learning modules. So make sure to read the questions, the situation, because some of the activities are based on situation. So make sure to read the situation first and go back with our discussion we had today to in order to answer the necessary uh, assessment given on or stipulated on your self-learning module. So see you all again next meeting, and please go back or read again the discussion we had today. Thank you very much, everyone.